Well, one of the concerns I had about the original bailout was it did nothing to provide a set of regulations that stops the very behavior that caused all of this. You have to learn from it, and it seems to me that you have to provide the regulations to say to the American people, we won't let this happen again ever. So there are a number of things that we have to do. Any recovery plan, I think, needs, and I think you need a recovery plan. Some call it a stimulus plan, but I think we need a recovery plan that gives people some sense that we care about whether they have a job. And you know, if you, for example, there's discussion about the automobile industry. I don't view this as three companies or one industry. I view this in the context of what do we do to deal with this economy, especially as it relates to jobs. We're told that industry relates to about 3 to 5 million jobs. That's the connector all the way through that industry. If that's the case, what would it mean if 3 to 5 million jobs are lost in the next few months, coming from America's manufacturing base? Well, it seems to me that would be devastating to an economy already at great risk. So the question is, when will we turn to also ask whether we will be willing to support through a recovery program the kind of jobs that we need in this country, and willing to support a world-class manufacturing base without seeing that base decimated as this economy gets weaker. I mean, I don't think you long remain a world economic power unless you have world-class manufacturing capability. And when we look at those sectors of the economy that have that capability and then decide that, as some have suggested, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who loses their job or who gets laid off. Well, it sure does matter. It matters to me. If there's all this concern about the financial sector, what about the concern about the job-creating sector in the manufacturing area? I think we need to do a number of things. Number one, I think we need a stimulus or a recovery plan in which we make significant investments, but I don't think you do that by just giving people checks. That is not the way forward, in my judgment. I think you do that by investing. You put people to work by the public works projects, by investing in roads and bridges and schools and libraries, the infrastructure needs that have been so long deferred in this country. All of those projects are ready across this country to be done. It'll put people back to work, and that begins to build the consumer base once again and give people confidence about the future. Second, we ought to take action this week so that we say to the Treasury Secretary, if you're going to continue to move money out of that $700 billion pot, you've got to put conditions on it. We don't want the American people to have to read that they're anteing up money so that the Treasury Secretary can move it to Wall Street, and Wall Street can then pay bonuses in December and January, and they can use that in any way they want without conditions that require them to expand lending or any other conditions that ought to be attached to that money. We ought to insist that those conditions exist. Third, we ought to require regulations be put in place as soon as possible on an urgent basis to prevent the kinds of things that we've seen happen that caused this financial wreck in the first place. Those regulations do not now exist. I know that the former Fed Chairman Greenspan, said he believed in self-regulation. Well, he sure got a belly full of self-regulation, and it completely collapsed this economy. So we need to put in place a regulatory approach that gives people confidence this kind of thing is not going to happen again. We also ought to say to the Treasury Department, stop the nonsense about more bank mergers. It's the last thing we need, nor should we want the public money to be used to accommodate more bank mergers. I know some have celebrated the news of bank mergers, not me. I think it weakens this country, not strengthens this country. And I also believe that we ought to create immediately an investigative task force of sorts that will begin to investigate and prosecute, if necessary, criminal behavior that was engaged in some of the practices that I described earlier. All of that, I think, is necessary. And I believe if and when we begin doing those kinds of things, we will give, once again, the American people the confidence about the future that they must have in order for this economy to get back on track. There is, I know, a lot of discussion about what went wrong, and some might say, well, you know what, that's pretty irrelevant. It's not irrelevant at all. We are destined to repeat mistakes unless we understand the mistakes we've made. And the route out of this, in my judgment, a circumstance where there is great economic peril to this country and its future, the route ahead, in my judgment, must be an active, aggressive set of actions by the United States Congress, working with this president and a new president to understand the urgency of the things I have just described.